Hey, everybody, I'm the Ranting Monkey. He's Scribe Light, and we're here to talk about movies you should have watched. Say hi, Scribe.
Hi, Scribe.
And today's movie probably makes you and I both happier than it should. Is that is that a fair statement?
um, yes, it is a movie that sort of plucks my heartstrings or my sentimentality more than it has any right to, given certain aspects of it as a movie. But I
Well,
forgive it because it's a Punisher movie, which is a rare event.
it is the Punisher movie, 2004, starring Thomas Jane and John Travolta. Um, as somebody who has loved the Punisher for a long time and who sat through the Dolph Lundgren video or movie, I was so happy for that. There's a lot of Punisher things wrong with this movie. Um, but it was so much better than that piece of shit.
Well, see, now when I was a young lad, I love the Punisher for. I mean, I've talked about this in other places, but at the time, back in the early mid '90s or so, the Punisher covered some topics as a comic book that you would never ever have seen in Spider-Man or Captain America or anything else. I have like in the first few issues of the Punisher, and I'm not kidding. One of the issues dealt with the Punisher finding a something shady was going on at a boys' military academy, and so he goes undercover to figure out what's going on, and he discovers a child porn ring.
Yep.
In another issue, he has to deal with rapists. I mean, and this is before like everything got sanitized at Marvel, and the writing and the setting and just the fact that there were no superpowers. This wasn't some flashy thing. It was gritty. It was dark. And it dealt with issues of the day. There was a flag burning issue that was great. There was plenty of issues about drugs and drug crime and the war on drugs, and Vietnam veterans. I mean, the Punisher's backstory in the comic books has never changed. He's always been a Vietnam vet. They've had to update his backstory for TV shows and movies like this one, but he's been one of the most consistent characters, at least as far as backstory. Now they've sanitized him a lot over the last several years, which has pissed me off. But I kind of ignore all that and just remember the core of the character. And this movie gets a lot of things right. Not
Real
everything, but a lot of things.
real fast. Adrian Bloom. Is that Bloom or Blum? I've always said Bloom. It's probably Blum. I apologize for that. Anyway, I have not seen the new Punisher series. Scribe, last I knew, was partway through it, so no spoilers, please. And
Yeah.
for the record, we are doing this as a kind of tribute to the fact that that has come out. That's one of the reasons this movie was picked. How about we jump into it?
Sure.
The movie's
Sorry. Before we begin, though,
Mhm.
I watched a different edition than Monkey. I have
True.
something. I
Yes.
have something called the extended edition, and the extended edition, in short, the additional materials about 15. It says 17 minutes on the deal. It also has an animated prologue. And what happened was there was a scene that was supposed to be in the movie, detailing the background between Frank Castle and the character in this movie, Jimmy Wells, who was a fellow FBI agent. Now, their backstory together was they were in Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm, and so there's supposed to be this prologue where the two of them are on a special ops team looking for a target, a high value target in Kuwait, and then there's this firefight. Um, Frank Castle has to go in basically single handedly and blow a bunch of guys away. Jimmy Wells ends up saving Frank's life at the last second. And this sort of sets up their relationship going into the movie. Now, if you see the standard edition of the movie, none of that happens. And the relationship between Frank and Jimmy isn't really fleshed out in any particular way in that version. But in my version, this whole subplot of Jimmy Wells and his importance to the plot and his importance to Frank as a friend becomes more vital to the narrative. And it makes things a little bit more interesting for the movie if you've never seen that version before. And I don't know how hard it is to get this version. I came across it randomly at one point. But as we go along in the movie, I'll cut in with the extra scenes that I had to see that Monkey probably didn't see. And we'll see how that compares with our overall enjoyment of the movie.
My version starts with a. a buy on the beach. At first, and I want to talk about the cover art.
Okay.
The version I have, and it's the one that came out when this first went live, has the Punisher on there and John Travolta's face in the background.
Yes.
But if you look at the Punisher, it is really hard to tell that that's Thomas Jane. It actually looks like John Travolta. So knowing nothing about the movie going into it, I didn't watch any of the promos and stuff for it. I knew it had come out, but there was no way I was going to get to see it at the theater, so I just waited till it came out on video. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, why the hell is he the Punisher? And then the first scene pops up, and you see, I forget the kid's name, John Travolta's son.
Oh, here's the thing. So in my edition, we get a couple extra minutes at the beginning where we set up that we're in Florida, we're in Tampa. So John Travolta plays Howard Saint, who is this bigwig. We'll get to what he does later. And he shows up at his club called Saints and Sinners with his wife. They go into the nightclub. They meet his right-hand man, Quentin Glass. We also have explained to us that John Travolta and his wife have twin sons, and we see them in the same room at the same time having a discussion about how one is telling the other, you shouldn't go down to the docks without telling Dad, and the other one says something to the effect of, this is my deal, stay out of it, and he leaves. Now, when I first saw this movie, that scene wasn't there. So I never had any notion for the longest time that the two sons were supposed to be twins. It never even occurred to me. I don't know about you.
I didn't know they were twins.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. It was the same actor played both sons, and the whole deal was that they were twins. But you never get that in the theatrical version, and they take 2 minutes at the beginning to kind of tell us that. And it's like, oh, well, that makes a hell of a lot more sense now.
Well, there's actually a scene. See, this is where we're gonna. Okay, we have to jump ahead. There's no way not to.
Yeah.
After John Travolta's son is killed, there's a scene where Quentin is kicking the shit out of the little Weasley guy. The
little Weasley guy is Mickey, and Mickey went along with Bobby Saint. Bobby Saint is the one who decided to go out and do a deal on his own. Mickey facilitated this, and of course, things go badly.
Well, in that scene, when he's kicking the shit out of Mickey, he says to him, you need to explain why Mr. Saint's youngest son is dead.
Yes.
So, I mean, technically, with twins, there is a younger of the two.
Yes.
But, yeah, that doesn't come across even a little bit.
I know. And it until I read something later, I didn't realize that they were supposed to be twins. This version takes a whole 30 seconds to let us know that that's what's going on. And the way that they set this up by opening up with sort of establishing John Travolta's character and his wife and his right-hand man, Quentin, and the relationship with the sons and everything, I'm not trying to give more credit than's due, but it actually sort of gives us a look and sort of does a little bit of world building before we even get into the main plot, which is kind of nice, honestly. It's almost like a little bit of a Sopranos thing where you get to see, okay, we know who these people are now, kind of sort of, what has this got to do with the Punisher? Oh, and then we move on to the scene where the theatrical movie opens up.
Which is the scene on the beach with the dock.
The dock.
Sorry. Where is it a drug buy or is it a gun buy?
So Bobby and Mickey show up in order to buy a bunch of high-end guns and do a bunch of arms dealing stuff. Yeah.
And they meet Thomas Jane, and this is the another part where I finally figure out that John Travolta is not the Punisher, because he's not in this scene at all. And this dude with bright yellow hair comes out, and it's Frank Castle. But we don't know he's Frank Castle because his name, I forget the fucking name.
Otto Krieg.
Thank you.
And Otto Krieg, I think Otto Krieg was a character in the Punisher comic book somewhere, but he uses it as an alias here. So anyway.
Yes. And everything goes wrong. The arms deal is interrupted by police who end up shooting Otto Krieg and Bobby Saint. And then we go on to the next scene, which is where I finally started understanding what was going on with this fucking movie. The FBI, ATF are cleaning up things, and Otto is on the gurney, dead, and he sits up.
Mm-hmm.
It was a ploy. He wasn't actually killed. He's the Punisher.
It
He's
was
Frank
part of
Castle.
well, he's Frank Castle, not the Punisher yet. Yeah, it was a part of a sting operation of the FBI. But no one was supposed to be killed. It was all supposed to be a clean thing. But Bobby Saint waved around a gun at the last second, and he got blown away by the cops. So now the son of a high value individual in Tampa is now dead, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, he gets up, he takes off his fake blood packs, he's fine. And then we immediately move into a retirement party because this is Frank's last hurrah before he retires to go to his family. And in my version, there's a little extra bit at the end of this scene because he just goes to this party, everybody's like, yay, and he's like, oh shit. And they give him well, he has a little moment with Jimmy right after the party's about to wrap up. And they refer back to their time in Kuwait. And Frank mentions how, well, you saved my life and everything. And then Jimmy gives Frank a watch, a really expensive watch that matches one that Jimmy has. So now they have, matching watches. And this is a small thing, but it becomes important later on in my version of events. Then we go into the scene where Mickey, the guy who was with Bobby when he got killed, is he's out on bail. He's picked up by the Howard Saint crew. He's taken back to the club, and he gets the shit kicked out of him by Quentin Glass. And he gives up who set up the deal. He said it was Otto Krieg, but Otto Krieg's dead, and John Travolta walks in and he's like, I'm going to kill the man who's responsible for my son getting killed. And he turns and shoots one of his other goons saying, you were supposed to watch him. You weren't supposed to let him out of your sight. Why did you let this happen? And Mickey's allowed to live because he's just an idiot, I guess. Yes. And also John Travolta mentioned something about how, what would your father think? Your father who gave his life for me. So some history between Mickey and his dad and John Travolta's character.
It's one of the parts of the film I didn't like because they don't ever explain that. Mm-hmm. It's just a throwaway line. I mean, it does explain why they don't kill him.
Yeah.
Your dad died for me, so I'm going to let you live. But it's such a throwaway line. It really is.
Yeah, and it would have been nice if they had picked a character. So far as I know, and granted, I mean, I know a lot about the Punisher lore, but so far as I know, Howard Saint is a completely new character made up for this movie. He should have been the Kingpin, but they couldn't use the Kingpin because he was tied up with Daredevil because he was originally a Daredevil bad guy, and the rights to Daredevil were at a different studio at the time, as far as I know.
Well, I'm glad they didn't use the Kingpin because they would have done what Daredevil did and killed him at the end.
Especially if they take him out of New York, which is just, and that's one of the things I want to mention first and foremost. The Punisher's territory is New York City. But apparently New York City was too expensive to film in, so they set everything in Florida in this one, which pisses me off because New York is a character in the Punisher universe. To take the Punisher out of New York really hurts it as far as I'm concerned. I understand why. I mean, on a sort of pragmatic level, but it pisses me off.
I don't because you can set things in New York and film them other places.
Well, yes, that's true too, and they could have done that. I don't know. I think just was more expedient because they didn't have scenery they could film at that passed for New York, so they just sort of gave up and just said Florida.
Jordan said, "But Florida man."
Yeah, I know, but Florida man. Oh, and there's also I also say that if you get it, whichever DVD version you might have, there is a really great making of featurette on there that talks a lot about the things that went on in the movie and the making of and such, and As things occur over the course of the movie, I'll mention those as we go on.
Yeah, I wouldn't have had a problem with them if they just used. If you look at what actually happens, you don't need to see like skylines and stuff.
No,
they could totally just this is New York, but we filmed it in
Yeah,
Um,
fly to Vancouver for God's sakes. Everybody uses Vancouver to double for New York. Buy some stock buy some stock like skyline footage, and then film
mhm.
on the streets of Vancouver, BC, and just fake it. I don't understand why they went to Florida. Maybe they got a tax break or something. I don't know. Anyway,
um, yeah, to me, it'd be like taking Daredevil out of Hell's Kitchen. It's just wrong.
it doesn't make any sense.
So where were we? We had so the next part. I'm going to go over it kind of quick here because it doesn't much matter. But John Travolta goes and sees his son, and he gets word that maybe the guy who killed him isn't actually dead. Otto's not really dead. At the same time, it's we see the party at Thomas Jane as Frank Castle goes to an island to visit his parents, and
I think it's supposed to be Puerto Rico.
yeah, and there's a giant gathering there to
A big
celebrate
family
him
reunion.
retiring.
It's a big family reunion. It's also a celebration of Frank retiring. Everybody from both sides of the family is apparently there, which, for lack of a better phrase to me, is overkill in the sense that you don't need that many victims. The Punisher is a very simple story about a very limited amount of tragedy.
Yes.
Why they brought in 30 people that we'll never know the names of any of them to end up being
Yeah, because
victims, especially Roy Scheider of all. I was like, Roy, what the fuck is Roy Scheider doing in this movie?
the story of the Punishers, his wife and kid were killed.
2 kids. Yeah, he had a son and a daughter. In this one, they just have him have a son.
Yeah. It's not that his entire fucking family dies.
Yeah, I mean, now in the comic books, he's separated from his extended family because his real family, or Frank Castle's real name is Francis Castiglione. He's actually Italian or Sicilian, but it was anglicized when his family came over to Castle. So in the books, one of the major plot lines in one of the earlier Punisher War Journal stories, which is great, it was like the Saracen or something. He has to go back to Sicily to find the remnants of his old family, and has a great adventure over there. So, yeah, the whole thing about the Punisher was the iconic origin of the Punisher is that his family is gunned down in Central Park after one of his kids accidentally witnessed a gangland hit, and the gangsters come and take out the witnesses, including Frank and his family. And that's all the motivation he needs. But in this case, they slaughter everybody, his mother, his father, his cousins, his brothers, his in-laws. Everybody's dead. It's like, fuck. Anyway, we're jumping ahead a little bit. We're jumping ahead a little bit.
For some people, killing the in-laws would make up for the rest.
Yeah. So now, actually, after the scene where he's in the morgue looking at his son and asking about how his the guy might not be dead, I get more footage for my version.
Oh, okay. What'd you get there?
So in that scene, Jimmy Wells, the FBI agent, is talking to Howard Saint and telling him that, like, look, Otto Krieg is dead. You need to leave it to the FBI. And John Travolta's like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to find out who really did this. Then we jump to a scene where Quentin and Howard Saint are discussing Jimmy Wells, the FBI agent. And Quentin Glass tells Howard Saint that it turns out Jimmy Wells has quite the gambling habit, and he's lost a lot of money and somehow paid it all off to a casino owned by the Toro brothers. Now, the Toro brothers are relatively minor figures in the theatrical release, but they get a lot more coverage in this version. So then, after he tells them that, they're like, so an FBI with a gambling problem and we need information. Then we jump to a complete scene that isn't even in the theatrical version at a casino where Jimmy Wells shows up. And there's all these like topless girls walking around in this because it's an illegal casino and he's walking around doing stuff. And the Toros, the 2 Cuban gangsters, confront him. And they say, gosh, on an FBI salary, how is it that you've paid us off like over $200,000 of losses over the last 4 months? And then Howard Saint walks in and he says, has it have anything to do with this money I have here missing from the lockup at the FBI headquarters? So it turns out that Jimmy Wells has been stealing from the FBI lockup in order to pay off his gambling debts, and now Howard Saint has leverage over him. And he says, okay, tell me everything you know about Otto Krieg. And the scene cuts off with Jimmy looking really, really sad and looking at his watch meaningfully, and then looking up and says, that's not his real name. And then they cut. and then they
Oh
move on
yeah,
to the scene.
that
Yeah,
adds a whole
so
different. Yeah, because in the theatrical release, it's just somebody told.
yes, they
Somebody
just
told.
somebody gave them a file, and that was all it is. Yeah, in this one, Jimmy Wells has a much bigger arc in this, and is the one that sets the wheels in motion for what happens to Frank and his family. So after that, then we jump, as the theatrical movie does, to Puerto Rico, where we see Roy Scheider meeting with his son and walking on the beach. We're also introduced very briefly to someone called Candelaria, who's like a witch doctor.
Oh
This,
yes, yes.
this guy who, I mean, they make such a meaningful aside to this guy being there, but he has such nothing to do with the movie, inevitably, except for like
Well,
one part.
yeah, he does play an integral part.
A little bit,
But
yeah.
it's another thing that they didn't have to do. There's no, I mean, no real reason for it, other than that's how you save people when they're horribly shot up, is you bring in an Indian because they can cure everything.
or Caribbean or
Um,
whatever he was. I don't know. I'm Jamaican.
yeah, well, he looked Native American. Let's not lie. He come on.
Native American?
Yeah, he kind of had that Native American shaman that kind of
He
look to him.
he looked like just a black man to me. I didn't see Native American, but I don't know. Whatever. Not that it matters.
So the next scene we get is the funeral.
Yes, the funeral for Bobby Saint, where Howard Saint and all those guys are.
And we
And
find out how fucked up his wife is. How Mrs. Saint
man,
is a brutal bitch.
so there's one thing about this, the villains in this, the main villains. Whenever the first time I saw this, my first thought after this scene was Lady Macbeth. You know, as much as Howard Saint, John Travolta is the chief villain, his wife is probably worse in a way. So they finish their funeral. John Travolta and his wife get in the car. Then Quentin comes up to the window and hands Howard the file and starts explaining to him who Frank Castle is, or what his name is, Frank Castle. Now, this is one of the points where the extended version has a little bit of a continuity error, because Howard Saint was there when Jimmy Wells was explaining who Otto Krieg really was. So why would he need to be told who Frank Castle is? That's one of sort of like the little bit of so one of the things you sort of have to forgive for the extra scenes they put in, which they obviously never quite intended to put back into the movie. But anyway, so he hands him a file, explains that he's Frank Castle. He just retired and he's down in Puerto Rico for a family reunion. And John Travolta's like, you know, kill him. And then his wife says, stop. Livia Saint is her name. She says, stop. His whole family, them too, you know, kill them all.
Yeah. Kill them all.
And and John Travolta looks at her and says, "Is that what you really want?" She's like, "Mm-hmm." I'm like, "Okay, do it." And Quentin's like, "Okay." So there you go.
Killed the whole family. And that's exactly what they do.
Well, we get a couple little things before then. Family reunion, the funeral. We get a quick scene where Frank's son gives him a gift, which he says, "I found this down at the market, and it's supposed to keep away evil spirits." And it's the iconic skull T-shirt. Now, the origin of the skull symbol has a much more richer backstory in the comic books. It deals with Vietnam and a bunch of other things, but they winnowed it down to this to, oh, it's a goofy gift from his son, which, like, okay.
But you know what? I will at least give them credit for having the shirt there.
Yes, unlike the Dolph Lundgren version, which had no skull. We'll talk about the other versions after we get done with this one. But
anyhow, so he gets the shirt, yeah, and a nice scene with his wife, and for some reason we get to see him having sex too. Yay!
Yeah, they do a little nookie on the beach,
which we don't need to see. This is one of my problems with Hollywood taking these movies and making them, because they always have to have something like that. It's not necessary. Just get onto the fucking story.
I think it's necessary.
Well, no, he loves his wife.
Well, I know, but they have to establish just how sort of they only have a very short time to get him to be the Punisher, so they have to sort of hyper extend out the symbolism of their connection, their love, the fact that she says, you know, we're not lucky, we're blessed, and just how, you know, perfect life is and everything, all the bright colors and all that kind of thing. So
you know what they could have done?
They
could have cut out some of the fucking flashback scenes he has.
Well, yes.
If they didn't need to.
Well,
Sorry.
they could have cut out the family reunion completely and just had
Yes.
him, his wife, and his son, or his son and his daughter, whatever. And it could have been just them going on a vacation somewhere by themselves, some secluded spot, and then all this happens. But anyway, so then the party's happening, and I don't really have a lot of notes on this because basically the bad guys show up and murderlize everybody.
Oh, there's a great chase scene though where you think
Oh
the wife
yes.
and son might get away,
Oh
but
man.
no.
And here's the thing now, and something else to mention. You'll see this in the making of if you watch the featurette. Um, at least 80% of the action in this movie and the effects are practical. There's no CGI. You got real car chases. You got real explosions. You got real guys on fire. Whole 9 yards. And I really appreciate that because it really does add that level of grit and groundedness to so much of a movie that is pretty ridiculous. But at least the gunplay and all the fights and everything are really good. So so they slaughter the family. The wife and the son get into an SUV and drive off, and they're the last ones to get away. Frank is his father gets killed. He has multiple fights with different guys and shows off just how much of a badass he is. And though the wife and the son, they eventually wreck the car. They run off to a pier. They're trying to get off to Grandpa's boat that's at the end of the pier. Apparently, that's a throwaway line the kid says to explain why they're running down the pier. And then the bad guys roll up in their souped-up truck. And
how the fuck did they get that down there?
Down to where?
Down to Puerto Rico.
Oh, the truck?
It's not just a truck. Come on, this is a big souped-up truck.
You can buy anything with enough money in Puerto Rico.
All right.
I mean, rent it, buy it. I mean, hell, given the setup of things.
Well, not anymore.
Yeah, well, it's true. Now that Puerto Rico's not there anymore, but anyway, so
I just found that's another part. If they would have shown up in like old beat up jalopies, I would have believed it a little better.
Oh, okay, so yeah, a fancy car is not good enough for you. All right, I see.
No.
Well, anyway, so they run, and it's actually really brutal. I got to say, even with as much goofiness as there is in the rest of this movie, that sequence of the wife and the son running away for their lives and getting onto the pier, even to this moment, them getting run down without mercy, no hesitation, still is pretty fucking brutal.
It was, yes.
Which is necessary because if it is not something that is just brutal and tragic and obviously heart-shattering, the Punisher doesn't make any sense. And thankfully, they did something brutal enough that kind of gives the Punisher his motivation.
As a husband and father, yeah, just shooting him would have been enough. This makes it worse. But yeah, I get that. So Frank is actually following them on a bike that shows up. I don't know if they owned it or the bad guys.
Oh, they showed off that one of the family members was trying to make a break for it on the motorcycle, but he got shot off of it. And Frank later on comes up and picks up the motorcycle and drives off on it.
So he's actually chasing them down, knows to go to the pier, even though he didn't actually see all this happen. And he finds his wife and child.
Well, he came across the wrecked car, saw that the window had been busted out, and the only thing nearby was the pier point. So he ran that direction looking around.
And again, I see what you're doing there, but I mean, this is Puerto Rico. They could have turned and went into town.
I don't know.
You're being generous, which is
being generous.
Not normal for you.
No. I'm being generous because the way they set up the geography of the action. There was one road out of that little place they were at. There was only one direction they could go, and given how flat the territory was, his line of sight probably told him which direction they were going, even though he couldn't tell exactly where they were at that moment. So I'm willing to forgive that chain of events as plausible, not necessarily perfect, but plausible.
Okay. Anyhow, he comes across the bodies, and he's obviously distraught, and as he's there with them, what shows up at the end of the pier but the truck. And basically the bad guys shoot him, throw him into the water.
Yep, big explosion. He gets blown off the pier in the explosion. He doesn't actually burn up. He falls in the water. We see him crawling out onto the shore, and then this Candelaria witch doctor guy we see show up and presumably, as we find out later, gather him up and go nurse him back to health for the course of 5 months. But that's later on.
Well, yeah, we know he's going to be okay. He's the Punisher. Otherwise, the movie would end right there.
Now I don't know if this is in your version or both of our versions. After that, we jump back to Miami, where we're back at the club, and we just see sort of a scene of John Travolta talking to his business guys, smoking a pipe, just because I guess he'll smoke a pipe. Watching his wife and his best friend / right-hand man Quentin dancing out on the dance floor, conceivably just as friends. Mm-hmm. This is setting something up for later, but just as friends.
This is called foreshadowing, folks. Yeah, that is in both versions. So
yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then we cut to them at their mansion, and Lady Macbeth comes out on the terrace to Howard Saint and says, "You avenged the death of my son," and she takes off her robe or whatever, and she's in a nightie, and conceivably they fuck over the fact that a bunch of people died, which is great for villains. Let's see. Then we jump to the 5 months later kind of thing. They don't tell us it's 5 months later in like a little undercard kind of deal. They tell us that in the dialogue later on. But Frank has a beard now, and he's all healed up and kind of scattered looking. And the witch doctor guy has brought him back to the scene of the crime, basically, where everything's been sort of like crime scened off and all the bodies are gone. And Frank, apparently, even in the aftermath of this, they left all of Dad's guns in the house. So Frank gathers up his customized pistols and his shotguns and everything and rolls them up. And then as he's exiting, he finds in the surf the black T-shirt with the skull on it that his son gave him. Mm-hmm. So he takes that with him.
That's a durable shirt to be in the water for 5 months.
Yeah, 5 months sitting there in the sand and the surf, and it's still it's still there, and B, it's in one piece. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then one of the lines that is cheese, but I like about this scene is that the witch doctor guy says, "Vaya con Dios, may God go with you," or whatever he says. And then the Punisher turns to him and says, "God's going to sit this one out." It's just like. Now, there's something else I have to mention in the overall of the movie. I wasn't a fan so much of the music.
No.
Now the music is. I mean, it's very. It's spaghetti Western music. It's sort of like very rousing, sort of almost upbeat and heroic type instrumental music, which doesn't fit the Punisher. Maybe in small portions, but they do it throughout the movie, and it really almost gives kind of a whimsical sense to a lot of the things going on, which kind of detracts from what I think should be the tone for the Punisher.
Well, it's another one of those times I don't think you need music.
You don't need music, or if you do have sounds or anything, it should be something dark and remorseless, if for lack of a better phrase. This, I mean, there's a lot of scenes in this movie where we basically have showdowns. We have guys when they pull their jacket back and their guns at their hip and everything. I mean, there's at least 2 or 3 scenes with that kind of thing going on. And in the documentary with the making of, they talk about how this is kind of an urban Western kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, maybe, but it is. I mean, the way they did it is for the Punisher. It really shouldn't be, and this music kind of takes away some of the power of it, I think.
If you look at it as an old Clint Eastwood movie,
mm-hmm.
Actually, the Punisher would fit very well there. All of his movies run together, so I couldn't tell you which ones I'm thinking of exactly. But I mean, there's even one where it's implied he's a ghost out killing the bad guys. It's what he was brought back for. So
the man with no name.
There's actually several where that's. But anyway, so we have Howard. Howard also gives her the earrings there.
Oh yes, and
they're important to the story.
They are important to the story as well, yes.
When she gives him Nookie, he gives her some really fancy diamond earrings.
Yeah, some very unique diamond earrings, which will be a plot point later.
So then Frank Castle shows back up in Tampa
Yep.
at a press conference. That is it. The mayor who's giving it? I
Well,
don't even.
well,
Who's that guy
first,
supposed to be?
well, before we get to that,
Oh yeah.
we get Frank. We set up Frank at his hideout. He's found this like ratty apartment building on the edge of Tampa, and he's somehow got an apartment there. And we see him setting up sort of these booby traps and his weapons and everything else in this little apartment. And he hides a grenade underneath the sink. There's a switch action little tray that comes out holding an extra gun. So he's got his little hideout tricked out in case he needs weapons or needs an escape hatch or something else real quick, which will become important later.
And he gets a car.
And he has a car, and he works on this car. He does an A-team special on this car.
Yes, he does.
Turning it into a little driving tank with pull-down steel shutters and a souped-up engine and all that fun stuff. And also, in the course of this, in sort of montages, we meet his neighbors, who become important later. Now, these neighbors...
I hate them.
Well, so here's the thing. These neighbors are characters that are from the storyline called Welcome Back, Frank, which was done in, I think, the early 2000s, late 90s. I think it was Garth Ennis that did the writing on that. And in the comic book, so the neighbors are Joan, Bumpo, and Dave. Now, in the comic book, Joan is a mousy, very shy, sort of agoraphobic little lady who's, you know, very sweet, but also sort of very ineffectual. Dave and Bumpo are effectively the same characters in both the comic book and the movie. But Joan in the movie is the so gorgeous, it's almost illegal Rebecca Romaine Stamos. I mean, I got to tell you, between Frank's wife, Howard Saint's wife, I forget what her first name is, but Howard Saint's wife, her last name's Herring. I forget her first name. And Rebecca Romaine Stamos, I got to tell you, these are some of the most gorgeous women on the planet. Really. They're just so good looking, and especially Rebecca Romaine. But anyway, so Rebecca Romaine is sort of like this, or Joan is sort of the sad working class waitress lady. Bumpo is a fat guy who likes food, and Dave is some kind of pierced up video game playing loser. And who knows where they get their money to do what they're doing, because they don't work. It doesn't seem like, or anything.
No, she works. She works.
Yeah, she works at the cafe, in the diner. Yeah, aside from the other two, I mean.
Yeah.
So we meet those three, and they become important later, a little bit.
I hate them.
Why do you hate them
so much?
Why do you hate them?
They just seem a little too convenient to the story. I don't mind conveniences for stories, but one, this is the Punisher origin story here. So even saying, yeah, they came from the comic books. Yeah, the Punisher was introduced in the 70s. You don't have to give me somebody who was introduced in the late 90s for that to happen.
Yeah.
And the story of the Punisher, the origin story of the Punisher, doesn't require anybody else to be there. Not in this manner. Not to the point where he has to effectively save them to save himself.
Yeah, the thing is that I understand why they did it. In a way, they have to provide some kind of emotional foil and some comic relief to this, because otherwise the only comic relief we have is Mickey, and he's no comic relief. They did not need it. I'll tell you what. Okay, in the book Welcome Back, Frank, which is where Joan, Bumpo, Dave, and the Russian all come from. That whole Russian sequence comes from that comic book. I mean, the comic book, that series by itself, taken by itself, is good, if a little weird for the Punisher. When I read the comic book, I thought these characters are really off for the Punisher, giving the Punisher sort of like emotional foils. And the thing is, in the comic book, Frank doesn't act the same way as he does in the movie here, because the Punisher has a heart of granite. He is not emotional. He's not sentimental. He does have a code of honor. What? Sorry.
This is a great time to bring up Dirty Laundry.
Okay. All right.
Because you're absolutely right. Dirty Laundry is how the Punisher should act.
Yes, Dirty Laundry is the best Punisher movie never made.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a short that Thomas Jane did. It is not titled The Punisher. It's not listed as The Punisher. If you look it up on YouTube, I believe it's just called Dirty Laundry. It is
Hashtag Dirty Laundry, all one word.
um, it is a spiritual successor to The Punisher.
Yes.
And what he does in there, as you watch it, this woman is being brutalized, and he's just going.
She's a hooker. She's being beat up by her pimp.
And he's just going to do his laundry, and he walks right by it.
Yeah.
He's like, not my fucking problem. Now, that's not necessarily how a Hollywood movie can go, and I understand that, but I hate it because the reason people want to see a Punisher movie is because they want to see the Punisher, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Anyhow, yeah, that's, to me, that is the Punisher. Dirty Laundry was the Punisher, and what happens here is the far too romanticized version of the Punisher.
Okay, we'll talk more about the other versions of this after we get through this one. But so anyway, so we meet the neighbors. They're all curious about who this guy is because at this point he's just some kind of strange guy working on his car and working at all hours and not sleeping. That's when Frank grabs Mickey. He comes across him and grabs him downtown and then takes him back to his headquarters for a scene right out of Punisher Warzone #1. If you have the comic book Punisher Warzone #1, this interrogation scene is lifted right off the page. And when I saw it originally in the movie, I was like, oh, good, because that is one of the best scenes in the Punisher. It's not as good in the movie as it is in the comic book because the Punisher is much more brutal and the reactions by the person having it done to him is much more realistic, which is hard to say when you're talking about a comic book, but compared to what he does in the movie, it's the same. Anyway, he hangs Mickey upside down with his shirt off, shows him a blowtorch he's lighting up, and explains to him how, you know, when you sear the nerve endings off on your back and everything, you're not going to feel it at first. You'll just feel cold and the smell of burning meat. And so he goes behind Mickey where he can't see. He puts the blowtorch on a piece of raw meat while he takes a popsicle and rubs it on his back. And he goes, ah, freaking out. And it works decently for the first couple seconds. And the guy's reaction later doesn't really work because if he actually thinks he's getting maimed, he wouldn't be as calm as he is once he starts talking. But in the comic book, it's perfect. But anyway, so he starts telling the Punisher all about the Saints, about their routine, where they go, the time clock of the wife's, habits on a Thursday night. And he also tells the Punisher that, you know, I hate the Saints. They've treated me like shit, blah, blah, blah. So Mickey becomes the Punisher's inside man into the Saints' lives, basically. And let's see. And then he starts in the course of Mickey telling him this stuff. We get a montage of them doing their routine, and Frank starting to stalk them and record their actions and start taking notes. He's starting to form a plan about how he's going to try to manipulate them into a problem. Then Frank reveals himself to the courthouse when there's a press conference going on or whatever. And he reveals himself to the press and Jimmy Weeks and some FBI mucky muck. We don't ever know his name or anything. We just assume he's like some official in the FBI. And he says, you know, it's been 5 months since my family was slaughtered. No arrests. What's going on? And they're like, oh, no, you know, we're working on it. It's like, yeah, well, I'm going to work on it myself. Let's see. Oh, and then there's a line that I think is in my version and not in the theatrical, where Jimmy where Frank looks at these two guys and he says, I just want to find out who gave me up. Which, of course, leads back into the whole Jimmy thing about him being blackmailed, but we don't know that yet, or at least Frank doesn't know that yet. Okay, so that happens. What I get that clear? Oh, yeah. Then we have the money laundering clear out in the high rise.
Well, first we have, isn't the scene with the golf shot? It's a very short scene. John Travolta is on the phone, and it's his son, and his son goes, "Dad, you're never gonna believe this." And then it slowly pulls back, and you see on the green. Well, it's actually on the green.
Yeah, right there, the hole. Yeah.
Frank Castle's headstone, and John Travolta goes, "Oh, I bet I can."
Yeah. Now this is the thing that this is one of those little logic problems to me.
Yep.
If the Punisher knew where to put his gravestone so that Howard Saint would see it, why don't they suspect that he's following them?
Yeah.
It never clicks. Like, there's no reason why that would be there unless he knew I was going to be there. How the hell did he know I was going to be there? We've got a rat. Because that would be where it goes.
Plus, you have the wonderful timing that he just happened to get on that green when that phone call came.
Yeah,
through.
exactly. Yeah, just well, okay, it's like artistic license. I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I'll give him that one. But yeah, I'm sorry. What was the next scene there?
So the next scene is that well, Mickey explained to the Punisher that Howard Saint has all his money because basically he's just a money launderer. And he's a money launderer for these Cuban gangsters called the Toro Brothers, which in the theatrical version, you don't know about yet, except in sort of like a flashback. But in the extended version, you've already met because we've seen them interact with Howard Saint and Jimmy Wells at their casino, so we know who they are. But anyway, so Howard Saint receives all this cash from the Toro Brothers. He counts it. He moves it around financially into banks in the Caymans or whatever, and then wires it back to the States all clean. That's the situation. So at any one time, Howard Saint has physically tons and tons of cash, and the Punisher knows where they count it. So he goes off to this skyscraper downtown Tampa and just fights his way up to the top floor where the guys are counting the money. And he throws down a suitcase and he says, fill that up. And they fill up the suitcase. And then he cuts a big hole out of the window at the top of the building. And he looks at the two guys piling all the money out. And he says, out the window. And they're like, what? Out the window. And when I first saw the movie, I thought, oh shit, he's going to throw them out the window?
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
And then no, he's dumping all the money out the window. $50 million he's dumping out the window.
I will grant you many of the exceptions you've given to this movie, but there's one that happens right here that I cannot forgive.
Okay.
When he has them putting the money into the suitcase,
yes,
he turns his back on them to cut the hole in the window.
Yes.
Meanwhile, there's a giant cart of money sitting there, and he lays his shotgun on it and leaves it there.
Yes.
And neither of them even thought about shooting him. Meanwhile, when we first meet these people, their immediate reaction is to try to pull a gun on him. When he first comes into the room where they're counting the money, they both go to reach for guns, and he's got a gun on them, so they don't do it. But like I said, he sets his shotgun down and has his back turned on him for like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I can forgive a lot, but that one is movie breaking for me, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty dumb.
Sorry, just an aside.
No,
anyway,
right. So they dump $50 million out on the street, and of course the traffic jams up and people are running and yelling. The two guys in the lobby that are sort of like guards or whatever, who are dressed all in black trench coats and things. I'm just like, okay, I understand who the bad guys are. Yeah, I understand who the bad guys are, but you know what? Your good guys also in a black trench coat, so it doesn't really mean anything. So then the Punisher comes down the elevator, and this is something that I can't really forgive either. He comes out, he's got a suitcase in his hand, his other hand is empty. Why these two guys don't open up on him right then makes no sense to me. I mean, they had no hesitation in blowing away an entire family full of innocent people and running over a mother and her child. But a guy standing there without any weapons in his hands, and they don't draw and fire on him right then? I don't know. But anyway, so...
For me, this is one of those points where it's a comic book movie, so I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I'll forgive that much more than I will the two guys not grabbing the shotgun and shooting this guy in the back.
All right. Well, we have a showdown between two guys versus Frank in the lobby of this building, and it is a Western showdown. I mean, the Frank pulls back his coat, and he's got the two guns there, and they pull back their coats, and they got their shoulder holsters, and then there's this moment, and then they draw, and he blows them away.
When you rewatched it, weren't you hoping he would go, say when?
Actually, I was hoping he was going to say, "You haven't met my friend yet, but he's been dying to meet you."
Yes.
God, best introduction line to a bad guy ever. Anyway, so he blows those guys away. Then I get a scene in the extended version where Jimmy Weeks is meeting Frank in a park because Jimmy had called Frank to talk to him, and Jimmy tries to encourage Frank to leave town. And he says, leave it to me to find out who set you up. because Jimmy knows that
It was
shit's
him.
getting real. Sorry, what?
I said he knows it was him.
Yeah, he knows it was him. And Frank says, "No, I got my own plans. Thanks and everything." And as he's leaving, as he's walking Jimmy to his car, he says something effective. Hey Jimmy, what happened to your Porsche? Because he's not driving a Porsche anymore. He's driving basically like a regular car. And he's like, "Oh, I just decided to try something new or whatever." And it's a sort of like very subtle moment of, that's weird. He always liked his Porsche. Why doesn't he have his Porsche anymore? And they sort of let that lie. That's just one more piece of his Frank's sort of puzzle as to what's going on with Jimmy, because something seems off. And it's just a brief little scene that just adds on to that subplot. Then we cut to one of the funnier moments in the movie where we're back at the apartment building, and Joan's like drunk ex-boyfriend is pounding on the door trying to get in, and she's in there scared and holding a knife. And Dave and Bumpo try to tell him to go away, but he starts intimidating them. Oh, sorry.
First, Dave just comes out and trying to be brave. Bumpo sticks his head out, but he quickly retreats. And the guy goes over and starts physically abusing Dave.
Yeah, starts slapping him around.
And grabs him by the nuts. I mean, it's implied. You don't actually see it, but yeah, he grabs him by the nuts. And like, that's not cool. And Frank opens his door, looks at him and says, "You need to leave." To which, of course, the guy, if somebody who looks like Frank Castle says that to you in that tone, just fucking go.
Yeah, you'd think.
Just fucking go.
Yeah, but this guy's an alpha male, so he's got to prove his dominance and everything.
Yeah, so he breaks out a butterfly knife and tries to threaten Frank with it, who punches him in the face. And then my favorite scene of the whole movie, slaps him on the nose with it.
Yeah,
shuts it back down.
He shuts down. He flips the knife around, shuts it closed, holds it there a second, smacks him in the face, and then says, "You shouldn't play with knives." It's just great. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And it's one of those things where it's like the Punisher would do that.
Yeah,
the Punisher would do that before he actually kicks the guy's ass. I should also mention Rebecca Romaine Stamos and the guy who plays Dave, Ben Foster. This isn't their only Marvel movie. Rebecca Romaine Stamos was the original Mystique in the X-Men, and Ben Foster would go on to play Angel in X-Men 3, the worst of the X-Men movies. Well, depending on how you look at him. That was Ben Foster.
Oh, wow.
And Ben Foster, have you seen 30 Days of Night?
No. Or if I did, I don't remember it.
Okay, well, Ben Foster is an excellent actor. And I mean, even in movies that are silly like this, you see his range between this, 30 Days of Night, X-Men. I mean, there's a dozen other like actual serious movies I could name if I could remember them right now. But Ben Foster's a great actor. So when the first time I saw this, I thought, I've seen him somewhere, haven't I? But yeah, he's great. Anyway, so then he chases off the ex-boyfriend. He has a quick little conversation with Joan about how she says she's moved to 7 different states, and in each one she's able to find the worst possible guy. And I'm like, you're Rebecca Romaine Stamos. You would have a sugar daddy up the yin-yang. This is the one thing that kind of bugged me. I mean, I like looking at Rebecca Romaine in this movie, no doubt about it. As far as making sense to what's going on, no. That is not... I mean, they should have uglied her up or something. Homelied her down somewhat.
You've obviously never been to a diner before. That's what all diner waitresses look like.
Oh man, if only.
It's like they have a production line that just makes them. God, this is all running together. The next scene.
I got it. So next, Frank. We follow Frank as he starts to set up the framing of Quentin Glass in having an affair with Howard's wife. So he follows the wife to her movie night.
Oh yes.
Yeah, he takes out a portable fire hydrant to save the spot on the street where her car is parked. He steals her car, drives it off to a hotel, makes sure it gets ticketed there. At the same time, he's calling Quentin because in the course of stalking Quentin, he finds out that Quentin is gay.
Yes.
And now this is a sign of the times, because he uses the photographs he took of Quentin kissing a guy as blackmail because he knows Howard wouldn't want to find out that he's gay, which, these days probably wouldn't be something you'd have a lot of leverage on somebody over.
It could be in that environment.
Sure.
If you're talking about a super macho mob family, basically, it could still be an issue.
It could still be. I think it would be a harder sell today than maybe back then. Definitely. But anyway, so he calls Quentin with a voice modulator, says, I've got photographs of you kissing a guy. I want $5,000. Meet me at this hotel. So basically, he sets up where Quentin is seen at this hotel. The wife's car is ticketed at this hotel, and he takes the car back to where the wife is before she gets out of her movie. Quentin doesn't find anybody there because there's nobody there to meet. And then we start planting these little seeds of there's something going on between Quentin and Howard's wife. And in the course of this, they also mentioned offhandedly that they're trying to get rid of Castle because they know he's causing problems, obviously. And I forgot to mention, back after the money was dumped onto the street, the Toro brothers come to Howard Saint and say, you lost $50 million of our money. We want our money back, and we want our next shipment to be completely protected. Mm-hmm. And Howard's like, yeah, no, guys, I got it. We've been working for 10 years. It's fine. I got it. So we know that there's a money shipment coming in. And Howard also mentions how, or Quentin says he's got a guy coming in from Memphis to take out Frank Castle.
Yes.
So then we cut to one of the coolest hitmen ever, in my opinion.
Yes.
Frank's having breakfast at the diner where Joan is working and Dave and Bumpo are. And then this guy walks in. He's got the Elvis Presley sort of pompadour thing going on. He's got a tear tattoo under his eye, which means he's like a killer in prison. He's got all these rings on. He's got a guitar case. He looks badass. And on the guitar case, it says Harry Heck. Now, Harry Heck is a very, very minor character from the Punisher series who wasn't nearly as cool as this. But they turned Harry Heck into this really cool guy. So he sets down his guitar case, and he starts opening it up. And Frank sort of reaches back to a gun he's got in his waist band. And the guy pulls out an actual guitar. And then he sings him a song. He sings him a little ballad about time and life and death. I couldn't do it justice. But it turns out the actor that plays that character wrote that song just to play this part.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, the director told the guy, hey, can you come up with a song the guy would sing or something? And so the guy wrote a song like sort of off the cuff to sing as sort of a funeral dirge to to the Punisher before he decides to kill him. And it's great. I love it. I mean, for all the Western stuff in this thing, that's the one thing I thought was really cool.
This is the best scene in the movie, in my opinion. Just the tension, how cool Harry was. The idea of a singing assassin is kind of silly, and to make that work as well as he did, that it's just such a great scene. Because you also have Rebecca, the fat guy, and Dave. Because this all happens in the diner she works at. Mm-hmm. And just the tension of that scene is like, that's awesome. That's how the whole fucking movie should have been. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he walks up to Frank and he says, I wrote that song for you. And then he starts walking out and he turns back and he says, I'm going to play it at your funeral. And he walks out. I'm like, oh shit. I mean, yeah, that one scene is so good. I've never seen that guy in another thing, as far as I know. I've never seen that guy.
He's a singer.
I think he's actually really is a singer. I haven't seen him act in anything else, I should say. So then we cut to one of the best choreographed action sequences in the whole thing, as far as I'm concerned. Frank's driving away from the diner in his souped-up car, and then Harry Heck in this muscle car, this green muscle car, comes up behind him as a drawbridge is lowering and crashes into him, Frank, and sort of pins him up against the bridge that's not quite still down yet. And then he gets out of his car with this gigantic gun and starts shooting at him. And Frank pulls down the metal shades on his car, sort of as Harry's trying to bust through all this armor. And then just as the bridge is low enough that he can actually get through it, Frank puts on the gas, jumps the bridge, crashes on the other side. Harry follows him. Frank tries to maneuver out of the way of other traffic and a girl running out in the street with a soccer ball, which is really weird to me. I just thought that was kind of out of place. But then he ditches the car. The car flips, and Frank's crawling out of the car. Harry Heck stops next to him, gets out of the car with his big shotgun, and Frank pulls out this little switchblade knife handle thing, looks like, you know. And Harry Heck looks down and says, "What kind of idiot are you bringing a knife to a gunfight?" And then Frank hits a button on the knife, and it's a ballistic knife. The blade goes straight into Harry Heck's neck and cuts his artery, and he dies. Now, for aficionados of the comic books, the ballistic knife was kind of a joke, a running gag in the Punisher comic books, because he'd always have like a ballistic knife on him, and it was part of the one of the profiles in the Punisher Armory section of some of the comic books. Mm-hmm. About having this, really tensile strength, steel spring-loaded knife he'd always have on him. So when I first saw the movie and I saw the knife handle, I'm like, is that a ballistic knife? I was like, yes, it's perfect. And I thought, and either you got some real big fans of the comic books that put that there, or just dumb luck that they decided to add that weapon. I think it's probably a fan of the comic books that put it in there, because that was awesome.
What is our next scene here?
Well, the next scene I have from my extended version is that Frank then meets Jimmy, and he tells Jimmy, he meets him outside the FBI office or whatever, and he tells Jimmy that he's going to be leaving soon. I don't know why this is. Again, these extra scenes sometimes don't fit in the continuity. But in the course of this scene, he notices, and we make sure the audience notices, that Jimmy's watch is gone. This matching watch that was supposed to be this big thing that him and Frank had together. So Frank, he sees that the Porsche is missing, the guy's watch is missing. He's acting kind of funny. What's going on? We kind of let that sit, and then we jump back to where the theatrical movie would be, where the money shipment's coming in.
Ah, yes, the next shipment. Hang on. Excuse me one moment here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Hi, chat. Let's see. Jessica Green says, I heard they were big fans of the comic. Well, Thomas Jane, I'll talk more about this after we get through the movie thing, but Thomas Jane is probably the fans' biggest advocate for the Punisher ever. And there's several reasons for this, but we'll talk about that later. So if he didn't add that to the film, hopefully the writers who are fans of the comic book also did. What else we got?
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah, the next shipment comes in, and what happens to it?
Well, of course, the Punisher blows it up.
It goes kablooey. Yeah, he wastes so much money in this movie. He could have taken all that. That's all I'm saying.
I'm also curious. I understand it is a comic book movie, but man, he has access to some crazy high explosives.
Yeah, he does.
It's all over the place. It's like super duper high explosives. I know they sort of imply that he raided some sort of like FBI store locker or something to get all of his equipment and things. When he survived and came back, they show him like pulling a big crate out of some self-storage locker or something. But all the same, he's got some stuff that just kind of surpasses what a Joe Schmo could do on his own, kind of thing.
That's silly. Even it's not like your standard DEA agent or FBI agent is running around with all kinds of heavy explosives at their house.
Yeah, it's a little
it's one of the reasons I really hate the way they did the origin story here, going with Welcome Back Frank rather than the actual origin.
Yeah.
And I get it. You can't really have him in Nam. A Nam vet at this time, he would have been.
Well, not even that, old. But the comic book they should have done, as far as I'm concerned, the best origin story for the Punisher was a short series called Punisher Year One. A little bit of a takeoff on like Batman Year One, but it goes over it takes the original like 3-panel origin story you would have in the old comic books, where it just kind of gives like a rundown of what happened, and it expands it out into a much more serious drama / violent action movie. It really goes into the psychology of somebody who has just watched his family die and now has to sit there trying to figure out what to do, because not only does he have war trauma, but now he's got this as well, and just watch a guy turn into an absolute robot to then find some way to make sense of the world. And if anybody makes a movie version of Year One, I will be a happy guy as long as they do it right and don't try to comic book it too much, because the Punisher, even in his most comic book days in the beginning, Punisher's always been a graphic novel. I mean, seriously, the material involved, the content, the character, the setting, it might have been in a comic book, but the character belongs in a graphic novel universe, not a comic book sort of jokey universe. That's kind of
The
me being
exception to that, the exception to that would be when he first showed up in Spider-Man, where he was a one-off character.
Oh yeah.
So if they wanted to do that, okay, but yeah, otherwise I agree with you.
Yeah, for anybody out there who wants to really see the Punisher at his best, first and foremost, if you can get a copy of Punisher number 45 of the first series, best Punisher comic book ever. In fact, one of my favorite comic books of all time. Secondly, Punisher Year One, if you can get a hold of that. And also the Punisher Max series. This came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it essentially pretends that the rest of the Marvel universe doesn't quite exist really, and it's just the Punisher in his own little universe. And it is the quintessential rendering of the character, in my opinion. It is so good. It makes no apologies. It is a graphic novel to the max. There's blood, there's violence, there's swearing, there's nudity. They don't hold back. It's great. Anyway.
Okay, so we're about an hour into this movie right now, guys. So
yeah,
the rest of it goes kind of fast though, because we jump pretty much action scenes.
Yeah, it's just action scenes and action scenes. So the Toros come to threaten Saint because now he's lost another bunch of their money, and they're basically going to come down on him like a ton of bricks pretty soon. And now Howard's kind of going crazy, and he tells Quentin to call the Russian. Now the Russian is a character again from the Welcome Back Frank arc. They only use him for basically one sequence in this movie, which is fine. Let's see.
Well, what happens is he says, "Call in the Russian," and the next scene we get is Dave knocks on the door and tells the Punisher that Joan, that's her name, right? Joan's boyfriend is back.
Yep.
And so he closes the door, and you see him like, fuck it. So he comes out and he goes over, and it's a surprise party for him. They want him to have dinner with them.
Yeah.
Again, this is one of my problems with this origin. Give me my Punisher who doesn't need people. And they sit there and they have this nice little bit of dinner, and Fat Guy and Dave, they're going to leave to leave Joan and Frank alone.
Yeah.
You know. And if Frank just leaves, right? He excuses himself.
She tries to talk to him about, your life doesn't have to be bad. You don't have to live in the memories of the past, blah, 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 blah. And she starts to try to make a move on him, but he's just not having it. It's like, no.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
And thankfully so, because the Punisher is not a romantic. There are instances in the comic books where he gets close to women, but not in a way that is at all a healthy version of what we would consider that, and very brief instances where you could maybe call something close and or romance, but those are very short-lived because those women end up being killed pretty quick. So him completely shutting down and throwing this idea away is fine by me. I'm fine with that. It was fine.
Not to mention, it's creepy to hit on a dude whose wife and child and whole family were just murdered. I mean, granted, it's been a few months, but anyhow, so he leaves, goes back to his place, and Joan goes over to hang out with, what's his name? Bumpo?
Bumpo.
Bumpo, sorry. Bumpo and Dave, and where they're
making dinner or something, making dessert or something.
Ready. Yeah, and the Russian shows up at Frank's house.
The Russian is a gigantic. So they got the look of the character exactly right from the comic books. I mean, I'll give them that. They even gave him the spider tattoo on his neck. Now, the Russian in the comic books is much more talkative and much more eccentric. I'll be kind enough to say he has no lines in this movie, which is fine because he doesn't need any. Now the character is played by it's a wrestler from the WWE or just wrestling in general. God, what was his name? The Russian. Where'd it go? Oh yeah, Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash plays the Russian. He is, as in real life, this guy is physically gigantic. He's just a huge man. And then you have I honestly, even with the music and everything, one of the most creative and memorable fight scenes in my mind in a movie since They Live, between Roddy Piper and David Keith, honestly.
Well, see, it's amazing that you bring that up, because I thought this fight went on for far too long, which is what that fight in They Live is known for.
Yeah, it's true. It's a 5 minutes straight of nothing but fighting.
So I like a lot of what they did in that, because it is, I mean, it's a life or death struggle. It's comic booky. There's
Yes.
no other way to describe it. What I didn't need throughout it was the opera music and the scene with them, you know, celebrating in the kitchen as he's getting the shit kicked out of him. I think it just made it drag on.
Well, yeah, I mean, let me put it this way: it fits for the movie they've made. It is not. It is not how it should have been done in an ideal situation. So, in that sense, it works for this movie. It's not quite what the Punisher should be. Although I will say something else. There's this one part right near the end of the fight where the Russian throws Frank through a wall into a hallway, and he hits the wall and falls to the ground. That is Thomas Jane. That is not a stunt double. That is not a special effect. That is Thomas Jane doing his own stunt, and it looks fucking brutal. And they show that off in the making of, and it's just incredible what these guys did for this movie, and did it practically and didn't do any like digital bullshit.
Trey Silver Wolf in chat says it gave it comedy. That's part of my problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
The Punisher's killing is not humorous. I mean, there's some comic relief to it, but not to this extent.
Well, there can be dark gallows humor to some of it. That's certainly fine. But not slapstick.
Clownish.
Yeah, a little bit clownish, especially with the music. The music didn't help. If you'd cut out the scenes cutting back to the three making dessert, and you just had the fight scene, and you had like darker or more thrummy music or something, it would have changed the entire tone. Although I will say the part where he hits the switch to have the gun pop out and the Russian bends the barrel, and the look on the Punisher's face when he looks at the barrel and looks back up at the Russian guy, and he's just like, oh shit. I gotta say, that was funny, but that could have been done without all the other shit, and it would have still been funny.
Now, guys, I do want to say I've been pretty insulting to this film so far. I still love this fucking movie. But there's parts of it, like this fight, I always skip.
Really?
I do, because
I enjoy it. Like I say, I've given over to the fact this Punisher movie is the way it is, and so in that sense, the fight and everything works for it.
Maybe what I need to do is just mute it next time, because the fight itself, I don't mind. The fight itself is great. Like when he picks up a toilet. Do you know how heavy a fucking toilet is?
Yeah.
And he picks it up like it's nothing.
Yeah.
So maybe next time I'll just mute it.
The part where he throws the grenade at the guy and then he hits it back at him through the window and it falls right there and he jumps in the. I mean, there is some legitimate comedy in that routine that, again, could have been done and could have worked just fine by itself without the enhancement of the music and everything else. So anyway, so the Russian beats the shit out of Frank. Frank eventually gets one over on the Russian by throwing boiling hot soup or something on his face. And knocking him down the flight of stairs till he breaks his neck. But then Frank is completely like out. So the three of them drag him back upstairs, and then Jones starts doing some like field hospital work on his wounds to try to get him. But he's unconscious. He's just out of it. And then for whatever reason, Quentin and the rest of the bad guys show up to, I guess, check up on the Russians' work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever. Anyway, so they show up. They got to hide Frank, and there's like this little freight elevator there in Frank's apartment, because apartments have freight elevators, I guess. And so Joan and the Punisher, who's basically completely unconscious, are down there, and Dave and Bumpo are just sitting in the room, taking up space and playing dumb. And then Quentin and his team come in, and we have, honestly, one of next to the Harry Heck scene. This scene is actually really good, because the guy who plays Quentin Glass, Will Patton, is as threatening a villain as you can imagine. He's just completely sadistic, heartless, and he
So
starts
cold.
so
So
cold.
cold.
And Ben Foster, as much as the character of Dave is kind of goofy, it works in this scene because he is completely innocent. I mean, his goofiness and everything else feeds into the fact that he's a loser, but he's also completely harmless. His portrayal to this point has shown he's just, you know, he's got a good heart, but he's absolutely a coward otherwise. And Quentin Glass starts tugging at the guy's facial piercings and asking him, "Where's Castle? Where's Castle?" And he gets out a pair of pliers and starts. I mean, I can't do it justice by describing it. It's actually very tense, very creepy, and it works.
Well, it does. The problem is it comes right after the scene with the clown music.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
It would fit that scene with the Russian just breaks this movie so much for me.
Okay.
Because you're right. This is an excellent scene, and the acting between the two of them when he's yelling that when this is getting pulled out of his face, it's
yeah,
blood curdling.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's an excellent scene. They followed the clownish fight scene with it. It's anyhow.
So we get the implication by the screams and everything else that something horrible's happening to Dave. The guys eventually, Quentin and the guys eventually leave, and he says, "Well, if you knew anything, you would have said something, wouldn't he?" And he's like wiping blood off his hands and everything. He leaves one guy behind and says, "You know, wait and see if Castle shows up." And then Frank and Joan get out of the elevator, the little hidey hole or something.
Wait, there's one small part before there.
Okay.
There's a call made to John Travolta to let him know what's going on. And as he's taking this call, his wife comes in to tell him she's going to the movies.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that sets up. Yeah.
It is important to the film. It's a very small scene that I wouldn't normally bring up, but yeah, it is very important. So then we cut back to Dave sitting there bloodied as
his face is all ripped up. He's sitting there. Yeah. His lips. I mean, they kind of have it in shadow, so you can't see all the detail, but you can see enough that, and you know what piercings he had on his face throughout the movie to this point, and they're all gone. Like all the lip piercings, the nose piercing, the one above his eyebrow, the ones on his ears. His whole face is just a wasteland at that point, which is just, it's just painful to look at. But so Punisher comes out. They know that there's one guy waiting. He goes over to grab a gun, but instead he pulls out the blade from a paper cutter.
Yes, I fucking love that.
Oh, and he puts it over his shoulder like he's got an axe to grind, so to speak. And he walks out and sneaks up on this guy and just splits right down the middle of his head with this paper cutter. And they show it. They show the blade like in the guy's head and him standing there with the blade in his head before he falls over and down the stairs. And it's great. It's great. It's a Punisher thing to do. It worked perfectly for that. And he goes back to Dave and he's like, "You don't know me. You don't know anything. Why would you risk your life for me?" And Dave says something that I'm still to this day not quite sure if it's fitting for the movie, given what we've seen, or way too sappy. And he says, "You know, you're one of us, you're family."
It works for the character.
Yeah, it works for the character. It works for what they've done in this movie to a certain extent, in that they're all sort of outsiders. They're all sort of rejects in their own way, although why Rebecca Romaine is, God knows why. That kind of works. It's still it just comes up to the edge for me of being too sappy. But
well, here's not only do I think it works for that, it works for the Punisher. Because, yeah, it is way too sappy, but that's who this character comes across as. So it works for the character, which is okay for me. But it also works for Frank because there's almost it kind of looks like a hug, but it's not really. Where he's like kind of falling down, and Frank catches him, and then he just hands him off to the fat guy.
Yeah,
there's no great embrace. It's like, yeah, whatever, dude.
Yeah.
Until the end of the movie, it works for me, and we'll get to the end of the movie later.
Sure, and then we start getting the internal monologue from Frank, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is actually, and this is weird because this is something they quoted from Punisher Year One, the comic book. So far as I remember, if it was stated somewhere else or otherwise, I might be mistaken. But he starts doing this little internal monologue war journal thing where he talks about sic vis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. He starts telling this little story about how the drill sergeant always told him that phrase because that's the philosophy you have to operate by. And so it shows him getting ready to go to war, putting all his weapons together and that kind of thing. And so he does the same routine again with stealing the lady's car because she's off at her movies, like Monkey mentioned, and also calling Quentin Glass again and upping the amount of money he's got to pay for these photos and telling him to go to a different location. And he does the same thing over again. He takes the car there, the parking ticket, and everything else. And then so he's got everything set up, and he also breaks into Quentin's house to leave an earring, one of the earrings that he stole from the lady's car in the first instance, on the bed.
The earring that she got when she gave up the booty earlier in the movie.
Yeah, because Howard killed a whole bunch of innocent people. Yay. And then I get a scene in the extended version where Frank, Jimmy Wells comes back home from whatever, and his apartment is practically bare. It's about as Spartan as you can imagine. And he's looking all unshaven and kind of depressed and everything. And Frank is waiting for him in an easy chair. And Frank confronts him about the fact it's like, you love that Porsche. Why's your watch gone? You've been acting really weird and everything else. And Frank's just like, I'm not quite sure what's going on, Jimmy. And Frank gets up out of his chair and he had a gun in his hand and sort of flashing back a little bit of what you're talking about earlier with the shotgun on the bag of money or the box of money. Mm-hmm. He leaves a little pistol that he brought there. He just kind of offhandedly forgets it there on the couch. And he gets up to go look out the window. And he turns around and Jimmy's holding the gun on him. And Jimmy's like, when did you know? And he said, enough to bet on it for a while, but now I do. And so they have a couple of words and then Jimmy pulls the trigger. And of course the gun's empty. And so Jimmy's like, oh shit. And so he flops down to the chair and Frank holds up a single bullet. And he says, there's only one way for you to get out of this room. And he throws the bullet to him. And then he pulls out his own pistol and cocks it. And Jimmy's like, he says, my family's dead, Jimmy. And so there's this scene where like he puts the bullet in the gun. It's really slow and he holds it up to his head. He holds it up under his chin, which is significant for something that Frank does later in the end of the movie. And he just can't do it. And then Frank pulls back the slider on his own pistol and says, yeah, you're going to do it. And then bam, and he shoots himself. And, even though this, from having seen the original theatrical version as many times as I had before this, and all these new scenes kind of being a little disjointed, mm-hmm. It actually adds a whole layer to what's going on with Frank and this friendship of his. And of course, the sense of family, because Jimmy was his family, sort of.
Right, yeah.
The remaining of his family, like all that he had left of his old life kind of thing. And now, of course, that was the one part that betrayed him, and now it's killed himself. So, and that cuts out back to the sequence where Frank calls Mickey, and Mickey instigates the chain of events that will lead to Howard basically destroying his own life.
Yes, because he doesn't take everything away from him. He makes him do it himself, which is awesome. The way they did mm-hmm. this in this film. First up is Quentin. When Mickey goes to Howard and tells him that there's some unpaid parking tickets from Mrs. Saint, and gives them to him, and I forget. Oh, God, I just watched this and I forget exactly how the exchange goes, but basically he lets him know that Quentin and Mrs. Saint have been at the same hotel together.
Well, so he says, we got some parking tickets need to be paid. And he says, well, then pay them. But then he says, where are they from? And he says, it's either like the Wyndham Hotel or something like that.
Yes.
He says the Wyndham Hotel from last Thursday. And Howard Saint says, what day was that? And it says, the 5th, last Thursday. And he's like, and where did you say you saw Quentin last week? at the
Yes,
Wyndham
yes.
at the or the Windmark Hotel, what it was called. And so then that sets Howard in motion to be very suspicious about what the fuck's going on with his wife and Quentin.
So Howard breaks into Quentin's house and just happens to find the earring laying in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
The earring that the Punisher has stolen. So uh, I just muted myself as I was talking. Sorry about that. Quentin comes home and Howard's waiting for him. Scares him a little bit and starts talking to him about Bowie, the man who
Jim Bowie.
Jim Bowie, the man who the knife is named after. And he tells his story about how back when Jim was alive, if he was playing poker with somebody and they accused him of cheating, what he'd do is clear out the room, drop a knife, and whoever won got the money, meaning you had to kill the person to prove that you weren't cheating or that they were. And he's clearing out the furniture as he's telling this story,
pushing it aside.
He pulls out, pushing it all aside, and because he even says the only problem is you have too much damn furniture.
Yeah, it's going.
John Travolta makes an excellent villain. He really does.
He does decent in this. Well, of several of the movies that I've seen, he doesn't go to the point of hamming it up. He stays relative. I mean, for the sake of relative to this movie, he stays grounded for the most part.
The only part that there's a like near the very very end, it's like maybe, but just being the cold figure, he plays it really well.
Yeah.
But anyway, he pulls out a switchblade, throws it down, and the whole time Quinn's like, "Dude, what the fuck is your problem?"
Because he has no idea. These guys have.
He thinks Howard's fucking with him.
Yeah, exactly.
And he doesn't take it for real until Howard cuts him in the arm. And even up into the point where Howard's killing him, you can see on Quentin's face he's very loyal.
Yes.
To and that should have been like again one of these alarm bells. Like this dude didn't even try to stop you from killing him, and you think he's disloyal to you.
Yeah, Will Patton is an excellent actor, and he plays this up because the look on his face is one of like, it's not even sort of like betrayal; it's sort of like surprised heartbreak.
Yeah,
you know, because I mean, and they don't quite get this across enough in the movie to justify to earn that moment as much as they should. But the way they refer to each other, sort of like Howard says, "Oh, you were my brother," and all this other stuff. You know, you're my best friend and everything else. But all the same, the death throes of Quentin Glass in this are perfect to the idea of I'm being killed by my best friend and I have no idea why.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's great. It's great.
Excuse me. Sorry, guys. Next up we have Olivia. And I gotta say, this is fucking brutal.
It is. It is.
He accuses her of cheating, and he basically tells her, you know, Quentin's dead. I forget how it. Goddamn! I literally just watched this.
What's the question?
How she knew Quentin was dead? Oh.
Well. So this is what's kind of weird is that so he kills Quentin at Quentin's house. And Olivia comes home to their home, the Saints' home, and Howard confronts her about cheating with Quentin, and she's like, "Howard, Quentin's gay," because apparently she knew, and somehow, and that's the other thing that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like somehow Howard never knew, I guess, and how she did. Anyway, well, but as far as her knowing he's dead, she looks off to the side, and in a side door on the floor, she can see some feet on the floor, like a body's lying there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why would Quentin's body be there? Why would they have brought his body from Quentin's house to their house and just laid him out in a side room? That didn't make a whole lot of sense. It still doesn't.
Sorry, Jesse just asked the question the same as you did. How did he not know he was gay? This can go back to that environment. If you are in a macho, you don't want to be gay in the mob today. I promise you that. You keep that shit to yourself and under wraps. And like how she knew would be the better question.
Well, it might be
Um,
sort of like a women's intuition, or he shared that secret with her or something, or who knows? I don't know.
yeah, but see, even that, see, that wouldn't make sense because you're not going to confide that in your boss's wife. You're
Yeah,
just not.
I don't know. It doesn't
So
that
anyway,
part doesn't
yeah,
make a lot of sense. Anyway,
Howard slaps her around a little bit and then takes her outside. And next time we see her, they're in a car, and it's all one continuous scene, but it's they're in the limo, and Howard asks her, "Do you recognize the neighborhood? It's Little Cuba,
where I found you.
and where I found you, three blocks from where we're at." Anyway, so the limo pulls over, and they're on a bridge, and Howard throws her off. And
Onto
now,
the
when I
train tracks.
well, yeah, when I first saw this, I'm like, well, that's not a high enough drop to have killed her.
Yeah.
And then you see the train.
Mm-hmm.
He threw her over the bridge onto the train tracks as the train was coming, and killed her. So good job, Howard. Killed now your
Mm-hmm.
best friend and your wife, who did nothing wrong.
Yeah. Well, except for ordering the death of a bunch of innocent people.
True, true, true. Well, nothing wrong to him. Nothing wrong to him.
I also love the fact that without doing it himself, Frank kind of one-upped everything in the sense that his family was run over by a truck,
Yeah.
and Howard's wife was run over by a freight train.
So we get a really small scene back at the club. Howard kind of lets his son know that he just killed his mother. Without,
Sort of, yeah. It's like Quentin's gone, or Quentin's wrapped up in something. He says,
yes,
which is like a tarp or something, and your mother caught a train.
Your mother took the train.
And then he pulls out a big suitcase full of money and said, for somebody that's dealing in millions and millions of dollars, he's pretty cheap with his henchmen because he says $50,000 to everyone who stays, $50,000 to anybody who kills Castle. I'm like,
Yeah.
50 grand? Really? That's it? For somebody who's been dealing with like $50 million in laundered money and everything, like, okay.
And then the next thing we see is Frank getting ready for war.
Yep, and he does the rest of his little speech, and he gets his skull Kevlar vest on, and he gets his weapons and his bow and arrow ready and everything to do some silent infiltration into the Saints Club to kill everybody. I mean, there's not a whole lot of detail to give here, save for the fact that Frank plants bombs in a bunch of cars out in the parking lot, which
we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, they're too many cars. But anyway, I'll move that. So he plants a bunch of bombs in the parking lot. He plants a bomb at the entrance of the building, and then he sneaks in and uses a bow and arrow to take out a few guys silently. He's downstairs when the little dumbwaiter thing comes down, and somebody says, "Send up some more champagne." So he plants a bomb in the champagne bucket, and that's great. And then they blow themselves up there. And then just a sequence of him clearing a room with an M16 and with an underslung grenade launcher, blowing everybody away.
Real quick, Bloodwing says a friend of mine was killed falling just 20 feet. Doesn't take much if you land wrong. True story, but I mean, if you're in a comic book movie and you're trying to kill somebody, 3 stories isn't going to do it.
No. Well, if that was even 3 stories, but still, yeah.
Yeah. The point there is definitely the train.
Yes.
So yeah, he ends up blowing up everybody and killing everybody except for
John Saint.
John Saint and Howard Saint. Howard has escaped, and John is pinned at a desk.
Yeah, the one arm is completely pinned underneath a bookcase, like this big metal steel bookcase that he doesn't have any leverage to lift off of himself, and a gun is on the table just out of reach of his other hand.
And I called him Castle instead of Punisher. Wow. Castle pulls out a anti-personnel mine, and he gives him this little speech about how it doesn't weigh that much. It's only 8 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, it's not that much. And he goes, until you try to hold it on an outstretched arm. And he pulls out his arm and slaps it into his hand and ties a rope to a hanging wire. He tells him that's a good workout and just walks away.
Yeah, the little trigger. He ties the trigger wire so that, like, if the weight drops on the thing, it'll pull the trigger on the explosive and blow it up. And so the guy's sitting there, his hand outstretched, held up, holding this 8-pound weight. And how long can he do it? And so then Punisher exits the building and starts chasing after Howard Saint, who's limping along. And Howard Saint says, "You killed my son." and then in the background you hear this, and then he says, both of them.
Both of them. Yes,
it's great. And then they have another showdown kind of thing, except that of course Frank gets the drop on him and shoots Howard in the other leg, and he falls down.
No, he shoots him in the stomach.
Oh, shoots him in the stomach. Sorry, and he falls down, and he walks over, and he throws the photos of Quentin kissing a guy on the ground, and he says, "I made you kill your best friend." And he throws the ring, the other earring down. He says, "I made you kill your wife. Now I'm going to kill you."
And he says, "And I just killed you."
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And which is enough, but then he grabs Howard's leg and pulls him over to a car.
Mm-hmm.
Rips out some wires from underneath, wraps that around Howard's leg, and puts another one of those mines on the back of the car. And this is where we get into the silly part of this, because you talked about practical effects and everything, and I'm with you through all of the movie.
Yeah, that's why I said like 80% of the movie is practical.
And here's where it falls apart. He puts the car into a neutral, apparently, and it rolls down into this parking lot across the street. And as it's rolling along, you see Frank pull out it's a detonator switch, and he pushes a button, and the cars start exploding all around the car that's dragging Howard along. Until finally he pushes another button, which blows up the car that Howard's attached to. And then we see the camera angle from above.
Yeah.
And he's blown up these cars to make the face that is on his shirt.
Yeah, there's a flaming skull pattern. It's also, that is one. Was that a used car lot? Because that's a lot of cars. I thought it was the parking lot of the club. It doesn't make any. Anyway, yeah, that was. If you ever saw the Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck, and there's that one part where they throw down the lighter or something, and it lights gasoline on the ground that forms the DD on the ground.
Yes,
it's cheesier than that, because at least that was actual fire.
Yes, exactly. The one thing I will say is I enjoyed it for the comic book aspect of it.
Sure.
I could see that being done in a comic book. Somebody says it was Howard's lot. Okay, yeah. But I could see that being done in a comic book. So I appreciated it for that. But as an effect in the movie, I was just like,
it was out of place. It was out of place. It didn't work. It was stupid. And then we're pretty much at the end of the movie. We got a little bit of a wrap-up stuff.
And I actually like the wrap-up part. I really do.
Yeah, the wrap-up's not that bad. And again, in conjunction with the extra scenes with Jimmy from the extended version, his almost ending here makes it a little bit more poignant, because he goes back to his headquarters. His battle is done. He's killed everybody. He's avenged his family. He sits there. He pulls out his gun. He puts it underneath his chin. And he's getting ready to take himself out, just like Jimmy did, which, again, makes it a bit more interesting with that extra information. But then he has an image that looks more like it was some kind of like cut footage from a scene they didn't show or something, of his wife dressed in black, like waving goodbye to him or something, or looking sad.
Mm-hmm.
Like he has this vision of this, and I guess that tells him that it's okay, or that he needs to let them go, or I don't know why his son wasn't always also in that vision. It's still not quite sure what that was supposed to be saying, but
this part of I didn't like this part of the ending. Let me rephrase what I said earlier, because I like what comes after this, because that part makes no sense to me. That's a Lethal Weapon moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
If he's out there to be the Punisher, he's in whatever way he can. He's already come to grips with what happened. He doesn't need his ghostly wife telling him it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not a Punisher thing to do, because there's other people that need punished, and maybe that's his realization. Now, I can't begin to think what they were thinking at that part, but that did not need to be in the movie, other than so he can tell Rebecca Romijn that you're right, you can save a life, or whatever fucking line he said to her.
Yeah. Well, this is how I would have ended it. Well, let me talk about that in a minute, and we'll finish off how it actually went. So he doesn't kill himself. He packs his stuff up. Rebecca Romijn says, he tells her to watch the news because she'll hear about him soon. And she says, "What section?" And he says, the obituaries. It's just like, and then we get this the silent long helicopter shot, zooming in on Frank Castle standing on a bridge, which I think is a bridge in Florida, like from really a far distance all the way up to right. And when he's standing there on the bridge, you can even see the bridge swaying because because it's in the wind and everything. And he's in this Punisher outfit.
One little part.
Okay.
He also tells Rebecca that he left a gift for them.
Oh yes, that's right. And that's also from the comic books.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that. That wraps that up nicely. I mean, throwing money at a problem is a lot better than a hug.
Yes.
So I'm so glad that they didn't do anything like that. You know, anything sappier than, you know, giving them some money to help them out. So that was cool.
That scene, that shot, that framing is exactly out of the comic book. Dave gets back from the hospital, and Frank has left 3 piles of money, one for each of them, in his old apartment that essentially lets them start a new life somewhere. And actually, in the comic books, there's a sort of sequel-ish where Punisher ends up meeting up with Joan again on a different situation. Not relevant to this, but it makes a lot more sense in the comic books than the movie does in trying to make a comic book out of it. But anyway, so then the Punisher is not standing on a bridge, and we get a little monologue from him saying, like, you know, I'm going to go after all the rapists and the psychos and the killers. You know, I am the Punisher, and that's how the movie kind of ends. How I would have ended it is that I would have had Frank come back to his headquarters, and I would have had him stand there and see the gun and have him pick up the gun and kind of look at it and not say anything about him thinking about killing himself, maybe just sort of implying it. And then, like, you know, something comes on over the radio about a killer or someone else or a rapist or someone got off, or like on a TV show, someone got off on a technicality who like killed 7 people or something. And that would like sort of tell him there's still work to be done, kind of thing.
I just don't think we needed the kill yourself part of it, but I could see that. Yeah. Did you happen to notice when he's on the bridge, he has Henry Heck's car?
Yes, because because he stole that from Henry, because it's his car, which is great. Because well, at least there's a continuity to it. It's like, hey, that's his car now.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
So and then the full version of the Harry Heck song is played during the credits, at least in my version. I don't know if it is in yours as well. And it's still a decent song by itself.
Yeah, I like the song a lot. I really do. To me, it plays very well with that scene is just so great. I really do love it. So, guys, that wraps up the story, and now we're just going to talk at you. So
so the Punisher in general. So I'm going to go over real quick. Let's go over real quick the other iterations of this guy.
Sure. First up would be Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah, Dolph Lundgren. So when I was a kid and I was big into the Punisher, and I found out there was going to be a Punisher movie made, I was so excited. And I waited until the movie came out, and I went down to the video store and I asked them personally to get me a poster. They ordered a poster, the movie poster of it, just for me. And I had it on my wall in my room for like years and years and years. I watched the movie and I was disappointed, but at the same time, it was like, it's a Punisher movie, so I'm kind of happy. There's only one part. There's only a couple parts of that movie that I really like. First and foremost, Dolph Lundgren, for the sake of things, does look the part, sort of.
Kind of. He's a little bigger built than the Punisher.
Yeah, he's a little bit bigger built. The other thing about the movie I like is it's got Louis Gossett Jr. in it, which is amazing. And the other thing I like is one line. There's one line near the end where the Punisher's been captured, and Louis Gossett Jr., his old partner, is like just bewildered and asking what the hell's going on. And he says something to the effect of, he says something like, and I'm not quoting exactly, he says, 39 murders in 2 years? What the hell do you call that? And he looks at him and says, work in progress. It's just like, you know, it was almost worth it just for that line. But the other thing is there's no skull. Of all the things you could leave out of a Punisher movie, the one thing you can't leave out is the skull. And I was just like, what the fuck, man? It never, they have it in the logo for the movie. They don't have it in the movie. Then you have the Thomas Jane version we just talked. Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the Dolph Lundgren one just pissed me off from beginning to end. I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a huge fan of Louis Gossett Jr. I loved him in An Officer and a Gentleman. I
Yes.
liked him in
Chappie! Iron
Iron
Eagle.
Eagle. No, that's not the
Chappie!
movie I was thinking of.
Enemy Mine.
Yes, Enemy Mine. Thank you.
Yep.
But and he is a deserved Oscar winner, guys.
Yes, indeed.
This movie is just like so many others that Hollywood has taken this is the first one I saw where I would actually accuse Hollywood of taking a great license and fucking it all up just for the sake of making a typical Hollywood movie with the Punisher name.
Yeah.
Um, it's so bad it's actually hard to find copies, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Like I say, there's this. I have a sentimental connection to it simply because I had that poster on my wall for years, and it was the first time that, I mean, of all the characters from Marvel that had been put onto the silver screen, more or less, one of the first was the Punisher. It was amazing because of all, you know,
Yeah.
he's one of the most politically incorrect characters the Marvel universe has when done as he should be in any case. And yet he was one of the first ones before Spider-Man got got a feature-length film. And it was around the same time that Captain America got his first feature-length film, which is why I remember that era, because it was like, is this going to be the years of like Marvel movies with like this really horrible Captain America movie and also this Punisher movie? Because they're so bad.
The Punisher movie was so bad. And the Punisher should be the easiest one to do.
You'd think.
No superpowers. It's just killing.
So then we had the one we just talked about, the Thomas Jane movie. We've gone to death over that. Then you have, now this is something I mentioned when you were off briefly for a minute. Thomas Jane, for everything else that you might say about the Punisher movie, Thomas Jane was the biggest advocate for the fans for the Punisher. He went to the mat, and they talk about this in the special features, and of course, Dirty Laundry is as much evidence as you need. Thomas Jane is the fans' champion for the character of Frank Castle. He is the Ryan Reynolds to the Punisher's Deadpool. I have a lot of respect for him in that sense, for having gone to the effort that he did, both physically to train for the film, to get the attitude of the character right, even if the writing sometimes kind of belied what I would have hoped for the Punisher. But also, like we were talking about, if you guys haven't seen it, look up the short film Dirty Laundry. You can find it on YouTube. It's like 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long or something. It's got Thomas Jane. It's got Ron Perlman, you know, Hellboy. He's in there. And it's great. And it is essentially a Punisher comic book from the 90s lifted off of the page. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's awesome. I when I first watched it, I stopped and watched it like 4 times in a row because it was just so fucking good.
Yeah. Let's see. Captain Assassin says, didn't he fund Dirty Laundry? Yeah, I think it was I forget exactly the details. You can easily find them on the internet, I'm sure. But it's actually one of a series of short films that profile some of the lesser known comic book characters from the Marvel universe. Well, maybe Punisher's not lesser known. There's also one out there for Venom. Have you seen the Venom short one?
I don't like the Venom short one.
Yeah, so it's a complete aside real quick. The Venom short movie, if you can find it, I forget what it's called. It's actually a takeoff on a French film called Man Bites Dog, which is a mockumentary, a black and white mockumentary following around a serial killer. And they sort of take that, truth in journalism, says Captain Assassin. They take that concept and transfer it over to following around Eddie Brock, I guess, and that kind of thing is kind of weird. But anyway, so Dirty Laundry.
Sorry, Truth in Journalism. The problem with it is that the end is almost like Blair Witch.
Yeah.
It's this huge setup for like nothing, though. Anyhow.
Dirty Laundry is excellent. Yes. It should be. It is the sequel to The Punisher, and it is actually, in all seriousness, probably the best Punisher film made to date.
Yeah, including this one.
Including this one. Then we have Punisher Warzone. Now, Punisher Warzone has some good aspects, and it has a lot of lousy aspects. Again, Punisher Warzone draws a lot of its material from, this time, the Max series. Punisher Max #1 is where most of the setup for this movie comes from. Ray Stevenson takes over as the role of the Punisher. And as far as looking like the character, Ray Stevenson fits the bill. If you don't know who Ray Stevenson is, if you've ever seen the TV show Rome, he played Titus Pullo. And physically speaking, the look, he fits the character. He doesn't add anything to make the character any more interesting, but he looks the part. And they have the skull, and he's brutal, and there's a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of the blood in this is CGI. Unfortunately, they decided to bring in Jigsaw in the wrong way, the completely wrong way. They have acrobatic gangsters, like parkour guys.
Yeah.
They give Jigsaw a crazy younger brother, which doesn't make any sense. The guy they get to play, Microchip. This is the first movie where Microchip shows up. Is played by the guy who played Newman from Seinfeld. And honestly, he's the best Microchip to date. And I'm not saying he's necessarily my main choice, but even with the new TV series, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but as far as like representing the character, he's the best Microchip.
Can I just say having Microchip is the only saving grace for this movie, in my opinion? That, and they do have the skull. I'll give them that.
They've got the skull. The opening scene at the Mafia Palace and everything is pretty brutal and very Punisher-esque. There's a lot of moments in Warzone that make the Punisher work, but the cops following him are ridiculous. Budansky and Soap. Even though Soap is right out of the comic books and he's a veteran character at this point.
I want to say something real quick. I haven't seen this movie probably since 2009. It came out in 2008. I saw it on video as soon as it came out. You said he looks the part, and I'm like, I don't remember that. So I pulled up pictures, and in still pictures, he looks the part. There's something about the way he carried himself in that movie.
Yeah, like I said, looked. He didn't quite do it, but he looked.
There's a picture from, I believe this is from the opening scene where he's standing on the table and he's shooting people.
Yes.
And if you look at the way he's standing in this picture, it looks like he's taking a shit while he's shooting. So there's something about his mannerism that didn't work for me. Where Dolph Lundgren, I'll give you that. Except for I think he was too big for the Punisher. But if he'd had the skull on, I could definitely go with that. Thomas Jane, I actually don't think looks very Punisher-like.
No, he doesn't. That's the thing I've always said. If you took Punisher 2004 and you took Punisher Warzone and you smushed them together and put all the good things in and left all the bad things out, you'd have probably the best Punisher movie you could possibly ask for. But you don't.
There's something about the way he carried himself that I was just like, God,
yeah, like I said, again, looked the part, didn't quite act the part. And Jigsaw is completely wasted in this. I mean, absolutely wasted. His origin story, the whole 9 yards, the way he did him with giving him a brother, especially that guy. The actor that plays his brother, I think his name's Doug Hutchinson. His claim to fame prior to this was he was Victor Toombs, one of the only reoccurring villains on X-Files.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
He was the guy who was in, I think it was called Stretch or something, or Squeeze, where he was the guy who could flatten out his musculature and everything and squeeze through like cracks of doors and stuff. But the only other claim to fame he has besides that is that he married a 16-year-old model. This was the big thing, and she was all like getting plastic surgery and stuff, and he's like nearly a 40-year-old man marrying like a child, but it was legal because the parents consented and stuff, and that it's really weird. But anyway, the movie just sucked. It just sucked.
What about Vinnie Jones looking the part? Is that the guy who plays him now?
No, Vinnie Jones. He was Bullet Teeth in Snatch, I think it was. Remember Snatch, the really big guy, the really big British guy with was very intimidating.
No, I wouldn't.
Look him up on the internet.
Yes, I did. I don't think he looks very Frank Castle.
Yeah, and also Frank Castle, honestly, and I know this is a little bit. Well, no, Thomas Jane's Australian, so I'd rather Frank Castle be played by an American. You know, just there's just something, I don't know, maybe sentimental about it. But yeah, Vinnie Jones doesn't look the part. Thomas Jane didn't really look the part. Ray Stevenson looked the part, but didn't act the part. The new guy, John Barenthal, I think is how you say his name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't. I know him from The Walking Dead,
Yeah.
and when I heard he was going to be the Punisher, I was like, "Ooh, why?" um,
Well, I see. I don't know him from The Walking Dead, so my first real exposure to him was this, and
uh-huh.
he's a bit too short, in my
Yeah.
opinion. But he's able. I've seen renditions of the Punisher before that he fits in with, so it's not completely off base. And without giving any spoilers, I'm about.
Well, this is the thing. When you talk about looking the part, it's hard for anybody to do that with a comic
Yeah,
book character.
true.
Um, because the guy in Warzone, for me, he just never smiled, and you don't have to smile, but he has a natural frown.
Hmm.
Um, eh, to me, that just conveys sadness. Where for the most of the part, it should be like a steely,
Hmm.
uh, tight lip thing. So there's always going to be something that's not quite going to fit. So I could see how the guy from The Walking Dead, whatever the hell his name is, the guy who's doing it now,
Hmm.
could work.
Yeah.
Um, I can forgive it as long as you pull off the swagger needed, the because Warzone, I swear to God, they look up that picture. It looks like he's shitting while he's shooting two guns. Uh,
Um, yeah. The
Trez Silverwolf said his cheeks aren't chiseled. Yeah, and sometimes that can be an issue with a character like this. But if you go back and you look at the Dolph Lundgren pictures, that would be your best face of the Punisher, in my opinion.
hmm. Yeah, the TV series I'm about either 9 or 10 ish. I think nine episodes in so far, so I've got like 4 left. Um, like I said, I won't give any spoilers away. A couple of things that really bug me. First, okay, without this isn't a spoiler, but Microchip is a lead character in this series. Except he never calls him Microchip; he calls him David. It
No.
really pisses me off. I mean, he always says David. He doesn't say micro. He doesn't say microchip. He's only referred to microchip in passing in a couple of different places, but otherwise, every time they have a conversation, he just says David. I'm like, no, no, it's microchip. He's micro. It's got to be micro. That's the whole thing. And that pisses me off every time I hear it. The other thing is that there is a lot of hat and very little cattle so far, in the sense that we've got a lot of character building, we have a lot of plot going on. The Punisher isn't killing bad guys as much. I understand what, given the story that they're giving. And again, I'm not going to give any spoilers away specifically on what's going on. Given the story that they're building up to, I can see what they're doing, fingers crossed, and I can see what they are setting up. They didn't have to take this long into the series to get there. They could have done where they are at now in the story, they could have done in half the time, as far as I'm concerned, and gotten us to where we need to be to have the Punisher doing Punisher things and not.
This is my
Yeah.
sorry, this is my problem with all of the Netflix Marvel things I've seen so far
Mm-hmm.
is they spend way too long on the buildup. Uh, for everybody who loves Daredevil, I wonder how many times you've watched it because I love Daredevil. Don't get me wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but if you try watching it a second time, it takes so fucking long
Yeah.
to
Sorry.
get to anything.
Well, I don't understand why they have to fit this 13 episode model, because it
Yeah,
forces them to put in a lot of filler to make up something to do for 13 episodes. Like Jessica Jones, it had about 7 episodes worth of story. They stretched out over 13 episodes.
mhm.
Daredevil, they made the most of each episode. I won't deny I liked most of the episodes, but it could have been a 10 episode series and not a 13, and they would have been just fine. Punisher so far, if they were going to have 13 episodes, it should have been like every 3 episodes should have been a different operation that the Punisher was taking down.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to see. I don't need the backstory. I don't need the buildup. I don't need all this hippity jew. Just get me to the fucking Punisher kicking down doors and blowing away bad guys and saying like grim one-liners. Seriously, that's all I want to have happen. Maybe that'll happen in season 2. I don't know.
We're about to wrap up here, guys, but there's a question in the chat that I think you could probably answer, Scribe. Can I watch the Netflix Punisher without watching Daredevil?
Um, You can. I think you would be well served in watching Daredevil season 2. Or if you can find somebody who's done a supercut of all the Punisher stuff minus the Daredevil stuff from season 2, because I'm sure it's floating out there somewhere. Because you don't need to know much, except there are some characters and some references that you're going to be completely in the woods without if you watch Punisher flat. So, but if you're a fan of the Punisher and you understand what's going on, they go over the backstory a bit. Some of the finer details that they go into in Daredevil season 2, they don't repeat in the Punisher. So it's kind of a toss up. It depends on how much extra time you want to spend. I mean, the Punisher stuff in Daredevil is all pretty good, except for the bullet in the head bullshit, which they haven't brought up yet. They haven't brought it up. I'm hoping it goes the way of the midichlorians and they never bring it up again. But so far, anyway.
Did we have a movie scheduled for our next one?
Well, granted
we talked about one.
Yeah, so next Sunday, or at least the next Sunday we do this, I don't know for sure, because next Sunday is Thanksgiving Day weekend, and I can't guarantee what I'm going to be doing or what I'm going to be feel like doing. But the next time it'll be on my channel, and after a long wait, I figured, given the cold of December that we are about to find ourselves upon, might as well do The Hunt for Red October.
For those of you who don't understand the importance of that, this is Scribe's favorite film. So
it is the best movie ever fucking made.
I'm going to have to be nice. Anyhow, guys, we've been at this for 2 hours. If you haven't seen this movie, definitely check it out. For all of the complaints, that's part of what we do here, is going over it critically. It is still a great movie, and I do recommend it. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, if you can find the extended version of this film, I'd recommend it just to have the option, because it does give you the option of whether or not you want to watch the theatrical version or the extras with the prologue. I don't know how rare it is. I might have like a moratorium copy, but it's worth it if you can find it, because it does enhance the story of the theatrical cut. So there you go.
Oh, real quick, yeah, this was just brought up in chat.
Oh, yes.
It says, yes, you have to watch Die Hard for Christmas. Guys, we have much as we did with Halloween, but a little bit different. We are going to try to cover Christmas movies, and we're not talking Charlie Brown's Christmas.
Yeah. We're going to do Die Hard. We're going to try to do, we would definitely do Die Hard and try to do Gremlins.
Lethal Weapon, I want to do.
Lethal Weapon, yes, and I have access to Die Hard and Lethal Weapon and Gremlins, so we won't be in trouble there. So we should be good.
So with that, guys, we are going to close this one out. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you hanging out with us. Scribbles, a pleasure as always. Guys, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.